This is Oklahoma Inside Out, a weekly broadcast of Cimarron Alliance that focuses on the issues, culture, and people important to LGBT Oklahomans. And now, here's your host for Oklahoma Inside Out, Scott J. Hamilton.
Hello, and welcome to this live audience edition of Oklahoma Inside Out. We are so happy that you are here with us. We're also happy that you are listening at home or watching us on YouTube, because tonight we are talking about truth. And the reason that is so important is because Holocaust revisionist and anti-gay crusader Scott Lively has been invited to Oklahoma City to teach and preach his lies. We decided not to demonstrate, not to protest, but simply to stand up and proclaim what is true. And that's why we have this panel assembled tonight. I want you to think as we progress through our show about what it would be like to be a 15, 16-year-old gay person, lesbian, and struggling with your sexuality, only to find your parents or your grandparents or your neighbors going to hear Scott Lively tonight and knowing that you are going to be demonized by his lies. That's why it's so important that tonight we focus on the truth. We have an incredible panel with us this evening, people who represent many different perspectives, people from Oklahoma City and well beyond. It's going to be an exciting time together talking about truth on this edition of Oklahoma Inside Out, and we'll jump into that after we first take a look at news making headlines this week. From the Gailey News Desk, here is Rusty Surrett.
And we thank you, Scott. Here's what's making news this week. The gay son of a former Ku Klux Klansman is planning to challenge a conservative Kansas lawmaker in that state's primary election this August. 28-year-old Eric Bishop has announced plans to take on Jan Pauls, who reportedly backs a bill that would allow Kansas residents to opt out of laws that conflict with their religious beliefs. Of course, there will be many updates on that coming up in future issues of the Gailey. Also making news, a big bowling weekend in Oklahoma City. It's the 22nd annual OK Classic Bowling Tournament that brings in bowlers from across the nation. OK Classic is a proud member of the International Gay Bowling Association. IGBO is the world's largest GLBT sports organization, and they have two IGBO-affiliated bowling leagues right here in Oklahoma City. Finally, a friend for a friend. The Tulsa Group was created in 1991, and its mission is to help provide services such as vet care, grooming, and food for pets to those who are living with HIV/AIDS and otherwise can't afford the services. There's much more information on that and many other fantastic stories for pet owners in this issue of the Gailey. Pick it up. It's this month for April, and you can also find more of those stories on Facebook. Just use the search word Gailey or go to Gailey.com. And that is it for this week. I'm Rusty Surrett. Mr. Scott, we'll take it back to you.
Welcome once again to Oklahoma Inside Out. Before we move on, I just need to say a very special word of thanks to everyone who makes our broadcast possible and someone who lends so much to the professionalism every week. And that's Rusty Surrett and our friends at the Gailey. You all just do so much for us, and we are grateful for what you do. So thank you. I want to first introduce our panel this evening. These are folks who I am so grateful that they agreed to be with us, because each one of them has a unique story to tell. And I think that you're going to find that this is where the truth lies. Our first guest all the way over is Michael Kornblit. Mike is the founder and president of the Respect Diversity Foundation, and he has written a remarkable, beautiful book called Until We Meet Again. It's a love story of love and survival in the Holocaust. Mike, I've read your book, and it's quite passionate, and so we're anxious to hear from you tonight on your thoughts on someone who is rewriting a piece of history that means a great deal to you. So welcome to Oklahoma Inside Out, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Our next guest is Pastor Neil Spurgeon, who is the minister at Expressions Community Church. Neil is a tireless advocate for LGBT equality in Oklahoma. More so, though, he is a man who has endured reparative therapy for a number of years and today suffers post-traumatic stress disorder because of the cruel treatment that he received, something that sadly is happening to young people around the country, around the world, and he's going to share with us this evening his story and his story of overcoming. So Neil, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
And finally, a man, frankly, without whose help, none of this would have been possible this week, none of our work, because he has given so much of himself. This is a man that I've known and had the privilege of calling a friend for some time now. I admire his work every single day because it's without end, his quest for truth and justice and equality. He's a brilliant researcher, an amazing author. He's the executive director of Truth Wins Out. I need to say this before I even introduce him. Yesterday over lunch, he said, this is a hard job to do when you're in a relationship. And it certainly is. I can attest to that. He hasn't been home all month and right now should be sitting on the porch in Vermont looking at the mountains with his partner, and instead he's in Oklahoma City with us because he believes that strongly in proclaiming the truth. He is the executive director of Truth Wins Out, my friend Wayne Besson. I'm holding in my hand a book that could almost persuade me to be in support of book burnings. This book is called The Pink Swastika. I have never in my life had such a difficult time paying for something because I knew what I was buying was anything but the truth. As I read through these words of Scott Lively, I was astounded to think that anybody could believe what he's writing. The sad truth is that people are believing it. His base is growing. And as testament to that, someone is paying for him to fly to Oklahoma City to teach and preach here in our city. That's a shame. And someone who has done a lot of work to combat that shame is Wayne. Wayne, how did you first become acquainted with Lively's teachings?
Well, I've been following the anti-gay and the whole ex-gay industry for quite some time, and there are levels of malevolence within certain these anti-gay circles, and there are people at the top of that pyramid who are known for their dedication, for getting up in the morning and looking for ways to smear our community, to destroy us as individuals and as a community. And Scott Lively is in the top echelon of trying to do that. I mean, after all, we're talking about a person who hates us so much that he's written a book trying to blame the Holocaust on LGBT people. And beyond that, I mean, he even tried to blame 9/11 on LGBT people as well. His MO is he takes a really horrible event in history and he tries to attach it to us.
He did that with the Rwanda genocide.
And he did that with the Rwanda genocide. So any horrible event in history he tries to put at our feet and affix blame, because his ultimate goal, if you look very closely at his work, is to have us eradicated, whether it's through death, as we saw what happened in Uganda with the anti-homosexuality bill, or just to have us imprisoned or forced into therapy. This is somebody who is incredibly dangerous, an individual who's an extremist, and in my view is a menace to society.
But he's also a very persuasive speaker.
Scott Lively is a very persuasive speaker, as you said. He's very bright. Unfortunately, he misuses that intelligence to harm people. But he can be persuasive to people who aren't familiar with history, for people who really don't understand how he twists and manipulates and creates complete fiction, complete fabrication of events to accomplish his goals.
I'd like to talk just a little bit about some of the things that he claims, particularly with regard to the Holocaust. To literally rewrite history in this way it's unthinkable, and yet he's done a pretty magnificent job of it.
I think he has. I mean, Scott Lively's work is kind of a couple parts to it. The first thing is he's a Holocaust revisionist. I'm going to read something he has said. That's Holocaust revisionism. He wrote, "Homosexuals as the true inventors of Nazism and the guiding force behind Nazi atrocities." And, of course, the second thing he does is he creates a gigantic conspiracy theory. For example, he writes, at its very root, there is a spiritual element to the Holocaust that suggests it was, in some respects, vengeance against the people whose moral laws had relegated pagan sex religions to obscurity. Now, what he's really saying here is it's a great conspiracy. The Nazis wanted to eradicate religion. And, of course, the gay people figured if they could get rid of religion through fascism, that they could succeed and bring paganism back. And so it's this great grand conspiracy that he has. And finally, it's an anti-LGBT smear campaign where, and he makes it very clear that it is, that this isn't really a historical book, as he's trying to put forth, but he makes it very clear when he says that the pink swastika is in response to the gay political agenda and its strategy of portraying homosexuals as victims of societal and Nazi persecution. So you can see, again, it's Holocaust revisionism, classical conspiracy, and an anti-LGBT smear campaign of the most wretched kind.
Mike, obviously the Holocaust is crucial to your history. I've read your book and was moved by your words and certainly the plight of your parents. What does it feel like to have someone just reinventing something you know not to be true?
Well, he's not the first person to do it. We unfortunately have had to live with this for a long time. In the last 30, 35 years, people trying to revisit the Holocaust and what happened during the Holocaust, or if it even happened at all. I mean, we don't have to go back that far. In 1992, we had a presidential candidate who was running on the Republican side who felt that the numbers were exaggerated in the Holocaust. And of course, I'm talking about Pat Buchanan, and he has somebody who has always defended some of the citizens who have come to this country, that snuck into this country, that they really weren't bad guards at the camps and stuff. So it's not unusual to have to fight this kind of stuff. But one of the things about this, I think, which is the absurdity of it, to blame it on the homosexuals, that's where it came from. Just quick little background. One of Adolf Hitler's closest allies happened to be a homosexual, Ernst Röhm. And he ended up leading the SA, which was an incredible group of people who did Hitler's dirty work in the beginning, and they went out and beat people and got people to change their minds about support and all that kind of stuff. And of course, when it thought he was getting too powerful, we know what happened. The Night of the Long Knives, when Adolf Hitler went and had his people murder Ernst Röhm and the leadership of the SA so that they could then take over and have the power. So the idea that they were the ones behind the atrocities it's an absurd fact. I mean, when you talk about revisionism, it is trying to say, well, Adolf Hitler was really not to blame for it. The Nazi Party was really not to blame for what happened. It had to do with a group of people that was a small minority, even in Germany, which at the time, of course, prior to them coming into power and the Nazi Party starting, was pretty tolerant of homosexuals in Germany before all that happened. So to try and do that, it hurts when I think about it, when I look at my dad, how people try and recreate something when we all know. But you also talked about the history, Wayne. That's one of the problems I think that we get into, is that we are not teaching enough about the history so that people really understand about World War II, about Nazism and how it came about. And I think when you don't do that, then young people are willing to listen to those kind of things. Or
they're certainly very vulnerable.
Yeah. One last quote, and this is from Joseph Goebbels, the minister of information for the Nazi Party, said his greatest line was, "The more you tell a lie, the more people will begin to believe it." when you don't stand up against those lies. And that's exactly what goes on here with Scott Lively and with others like him.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point in that there were, of course, gay Nazis, as there are, but that doesn't mean gay people invented Nazism, any more than the fact that there were gay milkmen means we invented milk, or that there are gay people in the post office means we invented mail. I mean, but that's what he does. He takes a grain of truth and he creates and spins and weaves a noxious conspiracy theory out of it.
You know, I think that's our next step in this discussion, is looking at how, just beginning with Nazism, and how that all feeds into where he is today. We're going to do a lot more examining of Lively's lies when we come back from this break. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Talitha Glossmeyer, co-chair of the Cimarron Alliance Board of Directors. I joined the board because I believe in the vision, mission, and work of this organization. We are working every day, listening to the concerns of our community and helping to address those very concerns. I hope you will consider supporting Cimarron Alliance with a gift of just $10 a month. Working together, we really can achieve equality for all gay Oklahomans. Please visit www.cimarronalliance.org and make your gift today.
One of the most important things you can do for yourself and for those you love is to know your HIV status. Knowing your status means you can live a healthy, productive, and happy life. HIV testing is quick, confidential, and in most cases, it's free. For testing locations in Oklahoma, dial 211 today.
Welcome back to Oklahoma Inside Out. Just a quick word before we continue our discussion. During that break, we heard an appeal from a board member at Cimarron Alliance to consider supporting the work that we do. I never, ever, ever do that during our show, but tonight I am, because what we're doing has implications all over the place, and therefore I'm asking, if you're listening at home, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're here in our audience tonight, if you've never supported Cimarron Alliance, I'm going to ask you to consider doing that. In addition, consider the work of Truth Wins Out, Expressions Church, the Respect Diversity Foundation. We are all operating with shoestring budgets. We are, every day, it's a magic show. You put a few little pieces into a hat, and at the end of the day, you pull a rabbit out. That's because we're all passionate about what we do, and that's the end of my commercial. But I would ask that you consider that. Wayne, just before the break, I was thinking how incredibly important it is that Mike brought up Goebel's quote there, because Scott Lively's been doing this for a while now, and you could almost see the plan taking shape by starting with the Holocaust, and that's all to be blamed upon gay people. Now all of a sudden, when he's got a new book, Reclaiming the Rainbow, then his assertions have some validity to his readers, to his listeners, because of the groundwork he's already done.
Scott Lively started his career in the early 90s with the Oregon Citizens Alliance on a very brutal campaign in Oregon to take away LGBT rights. And he went on from there and to continue to promote his lies. Of course, the pink swastika, as we've discussed. And, of course, there was a book on ways to recruit-proof your children from gay and lesbian people. And then he, when his message was not doing quite as well in the United States, as you all know, if you look at the polls, there's a lot more acceptance than there was even a few years ago, whether it's against being fired from your job or marriage. And as he's losing ground and traction here, he's taking his message overseas to places like Uganda, Eastern Europe, Russia, and other places where there's not the sort of freedom of speech and expression and the roots with an LGBT community that can speak up and fight back. When you have someone who lies like this, and habitually does, and is good at it, It's critical that we have groups like we have tonight and seminars. Other countries don't have the luxury because it's too dangerous to sit down like we're doing and debunk these lies and myths. And Scott Lively's thriving on that, and that's why he's taking his horrific message around the world, because if it can't be countered and people can't stand up to it, people will think his fiction is fact, and that's incredibly dangerous.
I've seen some of the videos of his, quote, teachings in Uganda. And it was frightening to me to watch these, because the more you watch, the more you realize that there's something driving him in this work that defies explanation. But the sad part is in a place like Uganda, people accept what he says as he's the authority on it. Well, he's also central to legislation there that would make being gay a crime punishable by death. And when point blank asked about that, do you think homosexuals should be killed? He kind of backpedals and he said, well, no, it was taken out of context. It was not taken out of context. And now he said, well, may not kill, but if they don't change, they should be punished.
Right, and that's like saying if you can, you shouldn't crush a rock unless you can change it into a Chevy. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But this is what happened in Uganda, and it's very scary. Scott Lively went over to Uganda a couple of years ago with 2 other ex-gay activists. They held in a hotel some seminars, and they had many prominent members of Ugandan society, including members of parliament. And he spun this horrific, scary tale of what LGBT people do. And as a result of this, it led to what he called a nuclear bomb on the gay agenda, which of course was the anti-homosexuality bill, or some people call the Kill the Gays bill. And there are incredible ramifications. I've seen it firsthand. We held a press conference to highlight the harm being done in Uganda at the National Press Club a couple of years ago, and a very brave young man named Moses showed up to talk about escaping Uganda because he was gay and feared for his life. He had to put a paper bag over his head to do this press conference.
In the United States?
In the United States. He feared for his life if he was sent back to Uganda. And he was trying to get asylum at the time. But I had never been in a situation before where I had to sit next to somebody like we're sitting right here, and they're talking with a bag over their head because they feared for their life. Scott Lively and the people of his ilk that went over to Uganda are responsible for that. They caused the fear, they caused the panic, they caused the absolute hysteria that's taking place in the Uganda society right now, and he ought to be ashamed of himself, but I'm afraid someone like that has no shame.
I think you're right.
If I can bring it back to something dealing with the Holocaust, exactly with that. Adolf Hitler didn't kill a single Jew. Didn't kill a Jew. Himmler didn't kill a Jew, any of them. They all say, I was not the one that did it. That's the same kind of situation that Scott Lively puts out there. Well, I'm not killing them. I'm not the one that's doing that. But he's putting people in that situation where he knows that people will go and do that to another individual, whether it's actually killed them or beat them within an inch of their life, whatever it is. And some of them obviously have been killed in that situation in Uganda, as in other parts of the world where his message is getting out.
And we have that right here in Oklahoma City. Pastors that will stand up in front of their congregations, rail against gay people, incite their congregations, and then hold themselves blameless. Neil, I want you to look at this for a minute, because you have a congregation, many of whom have come to your church after experiencing really traumatic situations in their own churches, just like we're talking about.
Yes, and I believe that there is a form of death and murder that happens to individuals through the ex-gay movement, because the lie goes against who you are inside, and so you're in turmoil years and years and years, and some people all the way up to 60, 70 years old, because they're being told by churches from the pulpit of who they are, and they're battling inside. I battled inside. I know it's just like what you're speaking on with the Holocaust, and it's a different form of death, it's a different form of murder, but they're doing it and they're washing their hands of it. It doesn't, what comes out of their mouth brings someone to a place where inside it's such a struggle and such a battle that someone's going to have to die between the two. You're either going to lose your true identity, or you're going to be someone that they made you into being. And in our congregation, and just 2 weeks ago, I ministered with, we have phone calls from pastors that are coming into their orientation, and then they're struggling, and we see that these men and women, that when they decide to truly be who God created them to be, that all of their friends leave them. Their whole foundation starts crumbling, and they don't know who they are, and they're trying to search and find it. And so what I believe is very important for the men and women that support the LGBT community is that we put out that arm of love, just like we didn't do a protest. We're sitting here and speaking about the truth, because the truth is what is going to set a person free. And families, men and women that are afraid to come into their true identity, when they do, they may hit some bad roads at the beginning, but when you come into who you really are, then the love will start coming back. My older son told me, he said, "Dad, I can love you now because you're being honest." And this was about 8 years ago.
See, there again, it comes back to truth. And I held up a book before that made my fingers burn. This is one I actually did enjoy buying. This is Bashing Back. It's one of Wayne Besson's books. And I just want to read a portion of this here. The shamed ex-gay ministries have finally come out of exile, where they have cowered following a grotesque series of humiliating scandals. The ex-gay renaissance includes the launch of a huge print ad campaign, a new book, billboards, and this is the most wonderful description I've ever heard of the ex-gay movement. For the unacquainted, ex-gay ministries are the hokiest of hoaxes. They are fundamentalist 12-step programs that teach masculinity to gay men by having them gulp Gatorade, and help lesbians become feminine by taking them to beauty school, where they can learn the fine art of growing big hair. Once the boys are biblically butch and the lesbians lipstick, a delightful Jesus magically turns these newly minted caricatures of heterosexuality into actual heterosexuals. And that's as good an explanation as I've ever heard for the ex-gay movement.
I wrote that.
I'm bringing that up now. You mentioned it, Neil. And one of the things that I find most astounding in all of Lively's lies is that he contends unequivocally that sexual orientation can, will, and must be changed. Now, how do you account for theologians, scientists, physicians, mental health professionals, all who say when you attempt to do that, you're causing harm?
Well, two things. First of all, the ex-gay industry is an experiment that has failed. Second of all, it's projected by every respected medical and mental health organization. Third, it causes an enormous amount of harm to those who attempt to change. And finally, it is an industry. There are people profiting from this. The people who are claiming they're changing and running these ministries have a lot of products to sell, or they're tied into these groups. And so it's very cynical. And the reason they're doing this, and the reason they're supported by the far right, has nothing to do with changing anybody. The religious right knows it's a bunch of hokum. The truth of the matter is here that they're doing this for politics. In 1998, 15 religious right organizations launched the Truth and Love campaign, which they called the Normandy landing of the larger cultural wars. The idea was to convince America that people could pray away the gay.
And that is the common thing we hear: pray away the gay. And we're going to have to take a break, Wayne. But when we come back from the break, I want you to speak specifically about. I love your T-shirt. Thank God you can't pray away the gay. We'll be right back.
I should have brought it.
Hi, I'm David Macy, a board member of the Cimarron Alliance, and I'm asking for your help. We work every single day to make life better for gay Oklahomans, now and for generations to come, but we can't do it without you. Please consider making a gift of just $20 a month to the Cimarron Alliance and be a part of our march toward equality. Visit www.cimarronalliance.org today and make your pledge. It's a gift you can feel good about giving.
edition of Oklahoma Inside Out is made possible through the generosity of friends and supporters like you. To support this program and the advancement of equal rights for LGBT Oklahomans, please consider making a generous gift today at CimarronAlliance.org.
Welcome back to Oklahoma Inside Out. Just before the break, we were talking about praying away the gay. And you said that those folks who are in power, on the conservative side, know you can't pray away the gay.
Well, Focus on the Family got rid of their ex-gay program Love On Out and sold it back to Exodus a couple of years ago. Now, you tell me, if Focus on the Family really thought they had a factory where they were churning out freshly minted heterosexuals and succeeding with this, do you really think they would have gotten rid of this program? Please, they would have spent $10 million more on it and tried to turn everybody straight. But they knew it didn't work. It was losing money. It was losing support. And so they sold it to the more gullible Exodus, who now is in financial problems because they bought the failed program. But the religious right sees this from a political perspective. Now, why in 1998 did they embrace this? They looked at polls, and poll after poll showed if you could convince people that you could pray away the gay, they voted anti-gay. And they also, as people began to come out, beginning with AIDS, people began to come out a lot more, and then it accelerated with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell fight in 1992 and 93. Suddenly people knew openly LGBT individuals. And the religious right went, oh my God, what do we do? This whole fire and brimstone we've been using isn't working now that people know their friends, neighbors, and coworkers and family members are gay. What do we do? Well, let's try to jump on this ex-gay bandwagon. Let's try to pretend that we actually care about these people. And by doing so, by pretending to be compassionate, by just helping people change, it worked a lot better than fire and brimstone. So the bottom line is it's a very cynical, politically motivated campaign that they simply do not believe, or they would have invested a lot more money in it.
You said pretending that they love us and as a way of engendering even greater support. Neil, I'd like for you, and I know that this is a hard thing for you to talk about, and so I appreciate your courageousness and your honesty. Would you share a little bit about your experience in so-called reparative therapy?
In the reparative therapy, I believe that the men and women that are working in it now may not, in this area, started out believing politically to do it. I really believe that there are men and women that are struggling just like all of the rest of us in their orientation. I believe that they're fighting every day who they are and trying to help other people. And what I found is, because I was raised Southern Baptist and then Assembly of God in the later years and then non-denominational, and as we were talking about on the break, is I went from in Southern Baptist being saved, once saved, always saved, and then so I could determine, okay, it was all right to be gay there because I knew I had my salvation. But then when we moved to Assembly of God, because we wanted to get a little more active in our worship, that every day of the week I was fighting who I was. And so it started out on a journey where a pastor, I shared with the pastor at that time that I thought was a struggle, and he then connected me with ex-gay ministries. I was in ex-gay ministry approximately, and I'll probably get the numbers wrong, and he'll probably send me an email telling me that I'm wrong, but here in Oklahoma City for almost 12 years off and on. And I was told that during that period that if I would have completed all of their courses, that I would have become straight. But what was
so
really...
did you have to go back and repeat grades again?
Well, they had a program that they would run on Thursday nights, and it would go for 8 months. And I never completed the 8 months because I was in my job. I was traveling all the time, so I didn't have time to go through it. But what would happen is I would come home from being out on the road. When I was on the road, I was gay, Neil. And then when I came back home, I was going to the ex-gay ministry being the changed individual. And so it was a struggle constantly. And we had 2 children, two wonderful boys, and both of them went through that struggle. And I believe that the ex-gay ministry does a lot more harm than just trying to change someone. It hurts the family. My ex-wife, it wasn't fair to her to be sucked into the lie that a person can be changed from their orientation. And I believe that it puts deep, deep scars into the families, into the spouses, and it's really an evil, evil thing, because we were married 25 years. 5 of it was fighting and divorce, but 20 of it was filled with me going to ex-gay ministry, trying to change. And I would go on the road, and then when I would slip and fall, the guilt and shame that you carried, because out on the road I could be the true Neil, but I couldn't be that at home. And so I wasn't being honest to my ex-wife, I wasn't being honest to my children, I wasn't being honest to my work. It brought a lot of anger inside, to the point at one part of my retail career, they called me Adolf Hitler, because I terminated people so quickly. And when I look back at how I handled those people, I handled them through the struggle of trying to be straight through the ex-gay ministry, and it was just a vicious battle.
Well, Scott Lively's going to use you as a footnote now in his next book.
Well, I actually, in the ministry that helped me here in Oklahoma City, I actually am on one of the footnotes with Mel White and one other. There's 3 of us that are the most dangerous people in the United States.
What good company to be in.
I really, really, really like that. And I guess the post-traumatic stress disorder, what happened to me was that when I decided to come out, I was pastoring a church, and I was preaching on the fruits of the Spirit, and I was in love, and I heard God saying, you can't teach this because you don't love yourself. And so during that sermon, I started crying, and of course the congregation thought the Spirit was really moving, and it was a very charismatic church, and so they were really flowing with it. And I kept going through, and so in that process, in the next 3 weeks, I finally stepped out. I stepped out and moved. I didn't handle everything right, but I moved with my boyfriend from 4th grade. I had him. We were boyfriends from 4th grade all the way up until I was 38 years old. And so I moved in with him and started going through the struggle of divorce. And I was in southern Oklahoma. Of course, at that time it was a major struggle because I was looked upon as being a child molester. Homosexuals in that part of the state, the government down in the South wanted to convince you that we were so evil that we were child molesters, and that's so far from the truth.
Sounds something like Scott Lively might say, doesn't it?
And I went 18 months without my children. My children were the heart of who I was. They were everything. And so during that 18 months, I didn't get to see them. And it became such a struggle that to be able to get visitations outside of DHS supervised visitations, I had to go back in the closet. So when I went back in the closet, I moved back in at home. And that's when I realized that I'd made a major, major mistake. That's when Neil started crushing from the inside out. That's when I ended up 7 days in a mental hospital trying to find out who I was. That's when the drugs were so strong that they were giving me, I couldn't even read. So I moved back in the home and living on a couch. Because at that time, when I came back into the home, I wasn't allowed to sleep in the same bed with my children. So I slept on the couch, and we went through a process. And then an opening came. An opening came for me to go into another retail job. And I took this position, and I transferred to Tulsa. And then I realized about 6 months into living in Tulsa that the laws were a little bit more liberal up there, the judges were. And I found out, I'm now a citizen of Tulsa County. So then I refiled for divorce. And I ended up going through that process of getting my children, just like anyone would, every other weekend, half the holidays, half the summer, to the point that I ended up marrying a wonderful man named Dean Kaufman, and we were able to get custody of my youngest son. We had our oldest son living with us while he went through college, and then our younger son, we were able to get custody from him and for him. And it was based upon the custody. His mother had such a hard time of him loving me because of all the propaganda. I do not believe that she was an evil person. I love her and as a person, but she was fed so much through the church and so much through the ex-gay movement that it was the wrong thing. And so she emotionally, it trickles down. It doesn't just affect the person. It affected children. It affected both my boys. Both of them had to go into therapy to be able to come out of this, because we were all being treated with post-traumatic stress disorder from the bombshell of the lie that we were taught. And we found out through that you can actually be loved just for who you are. And
imagine what it would have been like if you had been told that truth 20 years before.
Oh, I know. I say quite often it would have been so nice if we would have gone through biology and your biology teacher would have said, there's all of these orientations. They're all okay. Just be you. And I was talking to someone before we started the program, and I believe the foundation that pulled me out was the echoing of my great-grandfather. When I was 6 years old, I kind of got outed, and my great-grandfather always took me as a special project. He was someone that showed love to me, and he would sit on the porch in the back and whittle whistles, and on these whistles the bark would move, and he spent a lot of detail on it, and he would say, you see this whistle, you see what I'm putting here, this is what God has done in your life, and you are different. Always remember that you may be different, but God created you that way.
You're saying something very, very important, because that was the truth. And then all of the lies started bombarding you, and it's easy to lose sight of the truth. I want to take a look at, Mike, some of the challenges that you have in your work in diversity based on just that very premise. And we're going to do that. But first, let's take a break. You're listening to Oklahoma Inside Out.
Life can be a joyful adventure of spiritual discovery. At Church of the Open Arms, we believe in following in the way of Jesus as an inclusive, justice-seeking community, seeking the power of unconditional love that changes lives as we work together for alternatives to violence, as we seek racial harmony, full equality for LGBT persons, green, sustainable respect for the planet, ending sexism and patriarchy, and encouraging interfaith dialogue. Church of the Open Arms, UCC. Check us out at www.openarms.org.
One of the most important things you can do for yourself and for those you love is to know your HIV status. Knowing your status means you can live a healthy, productive, and happy life. HIV testing is quick, confidential, and in most cases, it's free. For testing locations in Oklahoma, dial 211 today.
Welcome back to Oklahoma Inside Out. Just before the break, Pastor Neil Spurgeon was sharing his experience in the ex-gay movement. And Mike, you wanted to comment on something that Neil said.
Yeah. I think it's so important that, and I try and teach students there, that you connect dots when you learn about things. After World War II, there was a man named Raphael Lemke who devoted his life after World War II because his parents were killed in the Holocaust. He escaped from Poland, came to the United States, and he fought for the passage of the International Convention on Genocide. And one of the things that he said of why he didn't want to put it in there in the treaty about genocide was mass murder, because he was afraid that if you defined it as mass murder, then if that's not what was happening, then people would not look at that as genocide. I look at these kind of things as the same kind of thing. That no, nobody's putting a gun to their heads and killing them. Nobody is sending them to a camp in this country now. But what we try and do through the language and stuff, you're trying to do the same thing, take away a person's identity. That was the whole purpose of the Genocide Treaty, is once you try and destroy a group of people, no matter who they may be, then that was the definition through a number of things in what you were trying to do. And I think that that's the situation. Luckily, Neil, you came out of that. But how many other young people today are going through that kind of thing and will not come out as long as we continue to have these kind of things going on? So again, connect the dots, and it goes back to the whole kinds of things dealing with the Holocaust and dealing with the issues of Uganda. I mean, you just connect the dots along the way.
You're absolutely right. Neil, I think one of the most striking things of what you said was it's not just damage to the individual. It's to the entire family, it's to your friends, it's to the community. And when this starts to now become truly a systemic, institutionalized kind of lying. And what can we do to prevent someone like a Scott Lively from continuing to build a base, continuing to spread his lies and his hate? I mean, it should be enough to be discredited by every professional medical society. That should be enough, but it's not. So where do we go from here?
Well, I think what we're doing tonight is where we go. Everywhere people like Scott Lively go, we're there. We stand up, we shine a giant spotlight on these individuals. They can only thrive in the darkness. They can only thrive when there's no opposition, when people aren't countering the fiction with facts. So wherever he is, we need to be. When we're there, we need to we're filming and recording, and we put this on the internet, and it gets out to a lot of people. And so before Scott Lively is booked anywhere, we have to hope that fair-minded people who investigate will learn the truth and reject that message.
We didn't plan this before the show, but I'm going to use this opportunity in what you just said. If there is any organization, any equality group, any race-based, religious-based organization that supports equality, and you live in a city where anyone has invited Scott Lively to speak, Cimarron Alliance would be thrilled to give you the blueprint of what we have done here to combat those lies and support you wherever you are, in the same way that we have had an outpouring of support from people all across the country. He is recognized as a dangerous man, and we will continue to do our part to stop those lies where they exist.
And that's a good point, Scott. And there's a precedent for that. Paul Cameron was the Scott Lively right when HIV started, and he went around trying to say that we should brand HIV positive people, that we should exterminate LGBT individuals, and he, of course, had caught up with them because of people stood up and finally started refuting his lies. And he was kicked out of the American Psychological Association, I believe the Nebraska Psychological Association, and so on and so on. And he was widely discredited as someone who was very truth challenged. And it essentially undercut his career. And I think that's the trajectory that Scott Lively is going to go on. Now, of course, he's trying to reinvent himself as this kind and gentle preacher. He moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, opened up a coffee shop called Holy Grounds, and he tries to. I've tried the coffee; it's unholy, and he's trying to reach out to young people and lure them with free coffee. And of course, he got in trouble with the law a little bit because truants were going there to hang out and drink free coffee. But we have to make sure that somebody like that can't mainstream themselves. We have to we have to ensure that people know who he is, because anonymity for someone like that, in terms of people not knowing his background, is what's going to drive more people to follow him. But when people see the real Scott Lively, most people aren't going to like who he is. And if they do, we're all in trouble.
Yes, we are. You talk about background and knowledge, and I think it's also important to know who out there in terms of politics is supporting Lively and others like him. Someone in our audience asked the question and asked you actually to address the importance of political activism when it comes to elections. How do we get up under the lies to find the truth when it comes to elections?
In terms of the presidential election, are you talking about?
I really think, I know that in Oklahoma, for example, as important as the presidential election is, the biggest challenges are faced at the local and state levels. So in general, if you...
Well, there's a lot that goes into that answer. A lot of it just comes down to campaigns and getting the message out, but also money is so big in politics now that plays a big role, and organization, getting out the vote efforts. So it's a multi-tiered answer to that. But the main thing is that people who believe that we should focus on unity instead of divisiveness, love instead of hate, need to organize, not sit on the sidelines, get out there and exercise their right to vote. Because I can guarantee you, some of the hardcore right-wing supporters of people like Scott Lively, they're real good at getting together and spreading the message and getting out the vote. And if we don't get out there, we're going to lose more elections. We're not going to have people in office who support us. That said, if you haven't registered to vote, go out and register to vote. We need you. Without you, we're going to see the wrong types of people in office.
Thank you.
I'm going to connect another dot here. One of the most important things that I tell students when I'm talking with them and I'm reviewing things with the Holocaust is November of 1932. November of 1932 was the last free election in the democratic country of Germany. Nazi Party ran in there in that election. Everybody knew what the Nazis stood for. Everybody knew what the Nazis would do if they came into power. And yet in that election, less than 55% of the eligible voters in Germany bothered to go out and vote in that election. If more people cared about their friends, cared about their neighbors, or simply cared about human life, and had bothered to go out and vote in that election, maybe what happened between 1933 and 1945 might never have happened. Getting out to vote is one of the most important things. Getting involved in what's going on. Connect the dots. That's what happens when we don't get involved and when people are allowed to supersede the system.
It's actually a fascinating statistic, and I think if we probably look at some of the biggest homophobes in Congress or at the state level, what we'll find is very similar, a small amount of people going out to vote. And I think that that's very, very relevant to us both locally and nationally.
Mike, I want to add, because you are out there speaking to young people every day in your work, and your work is about inclusivity, about embracing others. What advice would you give to a young person whose parents tonight are listening to Scott Lively's lies? What would you say to that kid?
I think the most important thing is know who your friends are at school. Get to know them, who they are. If it's a black individual, if it's a gay individual, a lesbian, and know who they are as a human being, and that they are no different than the person who is sitting there next to them. That we used to think that if you sat next to a black person that your skin would rub off and you'd become black. We say that about homosexuals. You can't sit by a homosexual because if that'll rub off on you. And I think young people are beginning to understand that, and I think that they need themselves to confront their own parents. And I know that's a difficult thing to say. It's very difficult to try and confront your own parents when everything that they've believed in is all of a sudden not the truth, and these things are wrong. But that's the most important thing, is get to know people for who they are as an individual, as a human being, as opposed to what kind of label has been put on them because of who they are.
Thank you for sharing that, because that really, I think, is reflective, Neil, of what you were talking about, and that is, it's hard when everything you've ever believed to be true is all of a sudden shattered.
Yes.
And you all of a sudden come to know that that's nothing but a package of lies. But there's hope in that.
Oh, yes, there's hope. And the great thing is that when you look out in a crowd, if you look out in a crowd here or in a mall, you have people that will love you for exactly who you are. And that is who you need to put in your circle. I tell people as they're on their journey to their identity is keep their circle safe. let it be people who support them. You don't have to have a huge circle when you're going through the storm, but have that circle with you, because those loved ones will take you through. Because when sometimes, especially if you're in a conservative state, right-wing agendas going on, if there is an agenda of any kind, it's that. And it's opposite from love. And so what we have to do is find that circle of love. And I believe that's what we're experiencing. I wish that I was now 6 with the community that you see when you look out in Oklahoma now. Because if I was 6 now, then I knew it would be okay, because there's so many people on our side. There's so many there. And they're not, yes, they're political. Yes, they're going out and being advocates that way. But the most important thing is they're opening their heart up and letting the love flow out the way it's supposed to. And that these children will be saved if they find that circle, if they find those individuals. And the parents, I have parents quite often that are experiencing it. I have sometimes parents that will bring their children to the church to see if we're safe, to make sure we're not giving them an agenda to change. And when they find out that we're just a bunch of people all messed up, we're all messed up, but we're trying to love the best way that we can. And that's what the community is all about.
Can I jump off something?
Very quickly.
He said hope. Wonderful word. My parents survived the Holocaust in large part because of 3 Christians who were willing to risk their lives and hide them during the deportations. 3 names were Wisniewski, Gorski, and Salke. When I end with talking with the students, I use that word hope, and I said that my parents have hope and faith in each and every one of them, even though they've never met them, because my parents believed that each of them were born with something very special inside of them. And what they were born with was a Wisniewski, a Salke, and a Gorski, somebody who is willing to stand up and do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I believe about these young people.
Wayne, we're running a little bit long, so we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to ask you just for a couple of minutes to not talk to the folks who are here, but to address Scott Lively directly. If he were standing right here, what would you say to him?
I'd probably leave the room, because somebody like that, I don't think you can get through to. Somebody like that, it would take a team of shrinks in Austria to get through to what drives somebody to spend their entire life hating. Somebody who gets up in the morning and reads the newspaper and goes online and say, how can I hurt this group? To be so fanatical, to be so angry, to be so churned up inside against people you don't know, nor do you care to know or to understand. I don't think you get through to somebody like that. I think that speaks to something deeply damaged inside. Any kind of person who would urge nations to commit atrocities against their citizens, that would urge therapy to heal people that aren't sick and fix people that aren't broken, to encourage prison terms or worse, lifetime prison terms or worse. What do you say to somebody like that? What can you say? I think whatever it is, they're fixated, obsessed with this issue. More obsessed about gay rights than any gay person, by far. And I think you don't appeal to people like that. I think you appeal to everybody else and you try to organize those who oppose such rhetoric and hatred. And there's a reason he's a Southern Poverty Law Center official hate group with his Abiding Truth Ministries. To become a hate group, it's not just what you say. You have to have your opinion, and it has to be backed by outright lies. And that's what he traffics in. And so instead of addressing him, I want to address the people in this room, and I want to address the people out there who are going to see this and listen to this on the internet. You have to find it within yourself inside to fight back. If you're sitting on the sidelines, if you're not doing something, if you're not supporting organizations out there that fight hate, you're assisting through passivity people who are incredibly active and dedicated to your destruction. It's time to stand up, fight back, and do everything in your power to ensure we have a civil society where all people are treated equally with dignity and respect.
You, sir, have done a great job, I think, in summarizing the reason that we're here tonight, to not go head-to-head with Scott Lively, but to address those lies so that the truth can be revealed.
And I want to thank you and the Cimarron Alliance, because every time I've been here to Oklahoma, you guys are on the front lines fighting back and doing what's right and standing up to such intolerance. And I'm proud to be here with you.
I want to say a very special word of thanks to all of our audience here tonight. I want to say a very special thanks to those of you who are watching us on YouTube or online, and certainly those of you who are tuning in regularly to Oklahoma Inside Out. Before we leave, I just want to say a very special word of thanks and ask you all to help me thank our panelists this evening: Mike Kornblit from Respect Diversity Foundation, Neil Spurgeon from Expressions Church, and Wayne Besson from Truth Wins Out. We'll be back here again this time next week. It takes a lot of great people to make Oklahoma Inside Out work and work well. I'm especially thankful to our producer, Chris Moyer, our sound engineer, Phil Carlton, videographer, Guy Peters, our production assistant, Calvin Rowe, office coordinator, PK Kelly Palmer. Cimarron Alliance board co-chairs are Jeremy Hood and Talitha Glossmeyer. Our news editor and anchor is Rusty Surrett in the Gailey News Desk, and our announcer is Lisa Pizzeri. It takes all of us working together to affect change, to create a world that is just and hopeful for ourselves and for generations to come. We'll be back here again next week. So on behalf of all of us at Oklahoma Inside Out and Cimarron Alliance, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for joining us. Hang on to the vision of a fair and just Oklahoma.
Oklahoma Inside Out is a production of Cimarron Alliance, Central Oklahoma's preeminent LGBT advocacy and education organization. If you have a topic you would like to hear discussed, or a person who you would like to hear interviewed, please call 405-495-9300 or email oklahomainsideout@cimarronalliance.org. Please feel free to share the link to this broadcast with your friends.